He was just walking home, minding his own business, when a police officer decided to make his life a nightmare. Beaten, bruised, and left for dead, Tyrone thought his story was over. But justice had other plans, and it struck back in a way he never expected. What happened next would change everything. Tyrone Davis was just 23 years old, but he had already lived a lifetime of challenges. Growing up in a predominantly black neighborhood, he had learned early on that the world didn't see him the way it saw others. The harsh reality of systemic racism, prejudice, and violence was something Tyrone had encountered countless times, and although he fought to keep his head down and mind his own business, he knew deep down that it didn't matter. In a world where black men were too often treated as criminals, Tyrone's existence was inherently his chest. The officer's eyes narrowed as if Tyrone's words were a challenge rather than a simple explanation. "You look suspicious, walking alone at this time of night. You fit the description of someone who's been causing trouble around here. I'm going to need to see some ID." Tyrone was taken aback. It was late, sure, but he wasn't doing anything wrong. He'd walked down this street dozens of times. Yet here he was, being stopped for no other reason than the color of his skin. He didn't move a muscle, his heart pounding in his chest. "I don't have any ID on me. I live right there," he said, pointing to the building down the street. The officer didn't care about Tyrone's words. Without warning, he lunged forward, grabbing Tyrone by the arm and yanking him toward the police car. "You're resisting arrest!" the officer yelled, his voice growing louder. "I'm not resisting! I'm not doing anything wrong!" Tyrone protested, trying to break free. But the officer was much stronger, and he slammed Tyrone into the hood of the car with brutal force. Tyrone's vision blurred as he felt the officer's fist collide with his face, then his stomach. His body felt like it was being ripped apart with each strike. The pain was excruciating, but the worst part was knowing there was nothing he could do. His cries were ignored, drowned out by the sound of the officer's voice and the chaos around him. Every part of Tyrone's body screamed as he lay there, pinned by the officer's weight. His legs and arms felt numb as the blows continued. The officer wasn't just trying to subdue him, he was trying to break him. And in that moment, Tyrone realized that the officer had already decided who he was. He wasn't a man in his eyes. He was just another black body to control, to subdue, to beat. Tyrone woke up days later in a hospital bed, the swelling on his face making it almost impossible to recognize himself. His body was sore, his skin covered in bruises and cuts. He could barely remember the details of the attack, but the image of the officer's fists was burned into his memory. The following weeks were a blur. He struggled to walk, to speak, to even think. The physical scars would eventually heal, but the psychological wounds lingered. He had been humiliated, assaulted, and degraded, all for simply walking home. But the world wasn't going to forget what had happened. His aunt, A fierce woman who had always taught him the importance of standing up for what was right, refused to let this incident be swept under the rug. She immediately contacted a lawyer who had been involved in civil rights cases before. His name was Adam Carter, and he had spent his career fighting for justice in the face of systemic oppression. Adam, a man in his late 40s, was known for his tireless work in police brutality cases, and he had seen this scenario play out too many times. He wasted no time in gathering evidence. He interviewed witnesses from the convenience store and nearby residents. He found surveillance footage that clearly showed Tyrone walking peacefully, not resisting arrest as the officer had claimed, but calmly approaching the officer and then being brutally attacked without cause. What followed was a wave of support from the community. Protesters rallied, demanding justice for Tyrone. People from all over the country reached out, offering donations to cover his medical expenses and showing solidarity. The story spread like wildfire on social media, bringing national attention to the case. The pressure mounted, and the department was forced to act. The officer, whose record had remained untouched until now, was put under investigation. As more details about his past actions came to light, multiple complaints of racial profiling and excessive force, his career came crashing down. He was eventually arrested and charged with assault. The very institution that had once shielded him from accountability was now forced to acknowledge the truth. Tyrone's case didn't just end with the officer's arrest. It became the spark that reignited the conversation about police brutality and the treatment of black people in America. People who had been silent for so long were now demanding change, speaking out about their own experiences with abuse. Tyrone's story became a rallying cry for those who had been oppressed and silenced, for those who had endured similar pain in the shadows. As the trial approached, Tyrone's confidence grew. The man who had once been beaten into submission was now standing tall, not just for himself, but for the countless others who had been subjected to the same horrors. When the day finally came for him to testify in court, he was a different person. His voice was strong, his resolve unshakable. He looked the jury in the eyes as he spoke, recounting the brutality he had experienced and the trauma he had endured. He wasn't just telling his story. He was fighting for justice for every black person who had been mistreated by the system. The officer, once untouchable in his position of power, sat in silence as the evidence mounted against him. In the end, the jury delivered their verdict: guilty. Tyrone's heart pounded as the room erupted in applause. The officer who had beaten him was now facing the consequences of his actions. For the first time in his life, Tyrone felt the weight of justice lifting off his shoulders. Tyrone's victory wasn't just personal, it was communal. His courage and determination in the face of adversity had given hope to a community that had long been oppressed, a community that had seen too many victims of police violence without justice. Tyrone had turned his pain into a force for change. His victory wasn't just about one officer's conviction. It was about dismantling a system that had perpetuated injustice for generations. Tyrone had taken a stand, and the world was listening. His case led to changes in local police practices, including better training for officers on handling situations with black residents and greater accountability for officers accused of misconduct. But the true power of Tyrone's journey lay in the transformation of his own spirit. The young man who had once been broken by the system now stood as a symbol of resilience. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was a fighter, a leader, and a voice for those who had been silenced. When Tyrone walked out of the courthouse after the trial, it wasn't just a victory for him. It was a victory for everyone who had ever been unjustly oppressed. He had faced the brutalities of the system and come out on top. His victory was more than a legal win. It was the beginning of a movement that would bring awareness to the injustice that had been overlooked for far too long. Tyrone's life would never be the same, but that was okay. He had learned that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones worth fighting. He had been beaten, yes, But he had also been given the strength to rise again. And now, the world had witnessed that rise. Tyrone's story is a testament to the power of standing up, even when the odds are stacked against you. Will you continue to let the injustices of the world silence you, or will you rise up like Tyrone and make your voice heard? If you were moved by Tyrone's courage, don't forget to like, comment, and share. What's your take on his fight for justice? And don't forget to subscribe so you can be the first to hear another powerful story when it drops tomorrow.